All right, so this is your chart reading. Hopefully, this will help you in some way. So, how, if you've never had a reading done before, like in a natal chart reading, it can get quite uh, voc like word like what do you call this vocabby. It's just a lot of what do you call this? Just a lot of terms we use. So what usually happens is that we kind of just define that. We help explain what that means. So this will symbolize this. This will symbolize this. Personally, though, I believe that I don't believe in just the planets being symbols. I think there's parts of the elements and chemical portions of their body, the composition, that has something to do with components of ourselves. Like the sun, for example, something to do with helium and stuff like that. Helium and oxygen, and that's also found in the heart. And the sun represents the heart. So that's something very very simple about the connection. So it's like people wonder, it's like, are the planets affecting us directly? Well, not necessarily yes directly, but kind of. There is an effect because it's like parts of the elements. It's there's something else there. It's not just energy. It's not just physical stuff. It's all of it. So, anyways, the point is, it's gonna get a little wordy. So, what I usually like to do is like to share. Where is this one right here? The screen. Here we go. And this is more for like the actual like people who want to or are interested in it as well. But it just kind of like gives a preview. So here's the main part. So you're talking about purpose, right? So your purpose is not really the North Node. There's a lot of purposes that we have, but the North Node, as you can probably see here, it's this little thing right here. That is the North Node. It's tied to the moon, so it's tied to our what do you call this? It's tied to our basically like what our soul wants to do. So there's the North Node. It's in Cancer. Usually, what that signifies is your direction is more towards things that are related to security, family, inheritance, ancestry, DNA, genetics. Being able to be yourself, your natural self, your wild side, your basic needs, really relate all to the moon. So wherever your moon is, that's where we would look into. So your moon here is in Aquarius. So because your North Node is your basically your North Star, it's another way of putting it is your North Star. It's in Aquarius. A lot of it is tied to being different, being unusual, being weird, being eccentric, having these gifts that are usually related to Uranus and Saturn, which is like kind of creating boundaries for yourself and knowing what needs to be set, needs to be formed, needs to be sort of like calcified. It's a sort of Saturn thing, but also breaking apart from systems, breaking apart from things that are sort of like just traditional. Your goal is towards that. When I say goal, I don't necessarily mean that's your personal goal. Your soul knows what to do, right? There's also the fact that there's what do you call this? Your South Node is in the opposite side, which is in Capricorn, and that signifies it in past lives. You're so used to kind of serving humanity. You're used to kind of having things very practical, very away from emotional things, more concerned about people rather than your own family, like the external world, the public itself. So you were kind of probably like a public servant, those kind of things. We'll look into the asteroids after this. But that's, yeah. So in this life, it's more towards something that means more to you, your heart, something that means more towards your health. Because it's in the 8th house, it's not just psychological health, which is, yes, health, but let me go deeper into that one. So Cancer, in this case, psychological health is feeling secure and safe, and having some sort of like backup, right? You know how to kind of create that physically. You know, kind of how you have this ability to do to I guess you can say manifest, because Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. It's all about formations, the form. Everything is about matter. Everything is about the physical things, material things. So you know how to acquire all that. You also knew you were quite wise in the past, very solitary, even though it was towards the public. So basically, you're kind of, in a way, you didn't know how to be there for necessarily others in a family way. And it could be communities, it could be friends, it could be actual blood relatives, whatever it is. It's not really tied to family. But because the North and South Node are tied together, that symbolizes that it's like what you learned in the past, you bring forward the gifts from that past. And a lot of that is being patient, steadfast, what do you call this? Something to do with business. It's a little bit tied to business, not really. More like this sort of hidden wisdom that you bring forth to society, and just knowing exactly what it is. You bring forth specific experiences from the past that you carry on to this life. Now, this is just going to be the gist of it. There's more details to this one, but a lot of it also is tied to, because this was in the second house, you know how to make money. You have this sort of wisdom to know how to create abundance from your money, from your own experiences, especially like working hard at it. Success is, you're success driven. A lot of it is tied to also creating like limitations and boundaries, and setting yourself goals, like realistic goals that are very like grounded. So you're very grounded. That's one of your gifts, and you bring that forward. But this time, you don't want to be so grounded. You want to be like, yes, grounded, but at the same time combine that with being more in touch with the emotions, being more in depth, and going to your deeper inner self. It could be your inner self, it could be your subconscious, your, you know, and really going to that. Like that's why it's also related to DNA. It's related to DNA, ancestry, RNA, heritage. Inheritance is also part of that. So whatever you inherited could be from the family line, from a bloodline, from your ancestry, right? It could be further than that as well. So with the placement in Cancer, we already talked about that. There's another thing here, and that's sorry, I'm just going to pause here for a second. Sorry, I had to grab this like little cheat book that I have. Not really cheat book. I'm just going to cheat a little bit there. So with I want to go deeper into the Cancer thing, because I want to see what else there is in terms of what we can find with Cancer itself, because this is your North Star. You need to look forward in terms of like what there is, what's available, what else we can see. Because with the deeper we go, the more we're going to find something. Okay. So a lot of it is also being more sensitive, being more, I guess also, going back into sort of traditional things that can be tied into that. It's in the house of, it's in the 8th house. That means it's about transformation. It's about things that you heal from on a very psychological, deep level, and a subconscious level as well, but also psychic as well. That kind of ties in with what we're going through. This is why you have all these abilities to, you're kind of going into the psyche. What do you call this? A lot to do with emotions for sure, being sympathetic, and being also, I guess, being so much in touch with your watery side. This is Cancer. So much so that you create good memory, right? But with this one is called an intercepted house. I can't really explain what it is, but it's basically the cusp of the house before and after, where it expands and it goes beyond this limit of Cancer right here. So what that signifies is that there's some sort of locked in sort of feel, as if it's hard to develop, your north node is almost like there's a part of you that kind of like doesn't know where you're headed. What you do know it subconsciously only. So it's part of your journey to transform through this whole thing. That's the general gist of that. Now, going into what I was talking about when it comes to possibly going into having good memory, all that stuff may not actually necessarily tie in with this one, but it does tie in with what we're going to see here, with the asteroids linked to it. So you have the closest asteroid that's linked to your north node, and what I mean by linked, I mean we call this a conjunction, and the conjunction usually signifies that it's something that you know how to work with. You're kind of like, it's something you master, and it comes kind of easily, but there's a bit of challenge to it where you have to kind of really like be focused. Okay, so in this case, it's about something with beauty. I don't have information on Bella as an asteroid, but because it's retrograde, a lot of it is more like the questioning of your beauty, that's tied to reproduction, because it's in Cancer. So reproduction, something to do with the breast area, your nipples, possibly. Sorry, the lymphatic system, the alimentary canal. So female reproductive organs, but also like I believe it's also tied to the stomach. I'm not in medical astrology, but I would say that has something to do with that as well. Also being kind of like drawn to water, that's part of that. So if there's a retrograde with Bella here, also in Cancer, it's almost like there's a questioning of your own inner beauty, because maybe a part of your family is kind of pulling at you. Let's take a look at this one. I want to see. 1 second. 8th house, Gemini. Oh, okay. That kind of makes sense because it ties in with the Chiron placement in retrograde, which means this is wounding. This is something to do with integration. It's in Taurus, so it has a lot to do with this area of the brain, the head, your face, the what you call when you go see an ENT, like an ear, nose, throat doctor. That's basically kind of like Taurus. So your hearing is that I have this placement too, but not in the 6th house. This one's more like directly your health. So when you were born, you naturally had this sort of like, maybe you had like a hearing problem, something to do with your vitality. It affected your hearing. You didn't have a lot of energy, or maybe something to do with the hands. So Mercury is often tied to the nervous system, your arms, hands, bronchial tubes, respiration, thyroid, thymus, organs of speech and hearing. So that kind of ties in right there with the opposition to Taurus. So when you were born, you had this like issues with probably like, it could be hearing, it could be things in this area of the head, and you kind of that become part of your body, or this body that you're in. It's also tied into Venus. Your heart is possibly all that. So anything to do with the heart, you have probably had something to do with the heart, your nervous system, with your hearing. I don't know, something to do with the nervous system, like with your heart, from the heart itself, like pumping blood towards the nervous system, or because it's nerve still, it's attached to the blood, right? But you also have Venus here, and Venus is connected to throat, chin, cheeks, sense of taste, kidneys, lumbar region, parathyroids, venereal disorders, glandular swellings of the neck. So I'm not sure. Maybe you had some sort of like, because we're talking also about the sun and Mercury and Venus here. The Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Uranus. So I think it has a lot to do with more with the nervous system. A lot of it is just nervous system stuff, which in turn kind of like any sort of, technically you could have been born with this natural ability to have all this like ability to have like higher vitality. you have good hearing, good skin. Well, I wouldn't say skin here. No. Maybe good complexions, good sort of circulatory, so like your kidney, like what do you call that section right there? The kidney, that area. I think it's called I forgot what it's called, the kidney system. I don't know what it's called. But I believe that is I don't know what it is. Actually, you know what? I don't know what it is. However, here's the other thing. You had Jupiter in the 12th house. It's conjunct your ascendant in your sun. So that means that there's something that was happening in utero. Something was happening with your mom. And I don't know if it has anything to do with like the liver. It's kind of maybe affected your sciatic nerves, the tumors. I don't know if she had some sort of excess things. It could be, I don't know, was she obese? I don't know, was there issues with her liver, her pancreas, her pituitary gland, sciatic nerve, tumors? If that affected you and that kind of carried on to your birth, that kind of explains why there's that sort of loss with the, I'm not saying you have hearing loss, but that's a potential. No, here's the thing about astrology. Keep in mind that astrology is a language of probability. Okay, so going back into Taurus in the 6th house in retrograde, I don't know the exact connections because I'm not in medical astrology, but there's something to do with the ears, the vocal cords, this area, the thyroid gland up to here, and the throat and the neck, that probably got affected by what happened. Now, if we were to look at the opposite, there might have been also toxins included there. If it was something to do with, we're looking at Scorpio, right? So that means that we're talking about maybe, I don't know if your mom had bladder infections, maybe excess bladder infections, excess, something to do with reproductive organs, like there's something too much. And that in itself kind of brought in those issues when you were born. So, which in turn, because Chiron also rules, Taurus, Chiron and Taurus rules basically beauty, that explains why you tend to still kind of question that part of yourself. It's like, oh, I have issues with beauty. Or you're learning to accept your inner beauty. That's what it is. It's an inner beauty. Retrograde also means that even though it repeats itself, retrograde is usually will feel like an insecurity about a specific aspect of ourselves. And but it also means that retrograde is it's an inner thing. So accepting your inner beauty. I'm pretty sure you kind of had to learn that, especially later in age, maybe after your first romantic relationship or after you got married, when you started to share your resources, because this is the 8th house. Okay, we're going to add into this one Clitia as well. Clitia is usually unrelated. It's related to unrequited love. So that means that if we're talking about, let's see here. Okay, let's see here. So it's deep emotions, but more like it's almost like you question maybe the emotions. You question whether people are going to leave you, and there's a kind of a trust issue there. And there's maybe feelings of abandonment. Again, like unrequited love, where you kind of give up yourself, because you do have your sun in Scorpio, so you very much like this. You really like loyalty. It's like cathartic loyalty, cathartic inspiration, cathartic. Everything just has to be like, it has to feel powerful and out there, right? And that kind of like you identify with that. You identify also with being able to communicate exactly who you are. It's in the 1st house, so that means your sun is in the 1st house with Mercury, Venus, and Uranus. It's all it's tied between Scorpio and Sagittarius. So that means you have that sort of you like a lot of how do you call this, like a lot of inspiration, a lot of like, I can explain, I can see the why you have these gifts that you have, because, and you embody this too, because you have your Mercury in Sagittarius is like very intuitive, highly intuitive actually. Less with the emotions, but more with inspiration. So you get all these like downloads that are just like, and it comes off just this burst of fire just goes, and it just comes through, right? And you kind of sense that too with people, and because you also have Uranus there, it adds that electric sort of component to it with the fire. And what that means is you identify with all these gifts that you have. It's part of your identity as well. That you kind of you embrace that sort of connection that is usually unusual or strange or different or out there. You know, very different, very also I guess you can say innovative, innovative relationship. But you get what I'm saying. It's that energy of Uranus. You want it to be also groundbreaking, right? Literally, possibly literally as well. You like relationships that highly inspire you, that are very much in tune with spirit, and it's both intuition and instinct combined. And so, right, I would say that's part of also how you identify and strongly what you identify, but maybe in the past you kind of used to also, maybe there's a part of you that rejected the, I guess you can say the complacency or the take it easy sort of like slow movements like that you grew up with. It could be family, your environment, anyone you were surrounded with. Um, and that's in Taurus. It's right here. It's seen through the descendant in Taurus. So right here. So that means that it's probably possibly like something that you it's part of your shadow. So that means that when you rejected that when you were younger, um, people of the same kind of nature started coming to you as well. People who are not as emotional, people who are kind of more like you actually got to be grounded, got to be realistic. There's also a sense of pessimism there as well. Tauruses can be pessimistic, very direct and blunt, and not sensitive or sympathetic towards emotions. And that's why you have your North Node in Cancer. That explains that whole thing as well. So it also means that people maybe you came from a background and your upbringing or your orientation was linked directly to money is more important than anything else, beauty is more important than anything else, luxury, feeling comfortable, relaxed. There's no sense of like, there's no sense. If anything, maybe the family you grew up in back then, even or other people that you were surrounded with, were probably. Or maybe they were afraid of death as well. This idea of like ending things that are ending. You want it to be, they like it to be stable, and you kind of didn't understand that. You're just like, what the fuck? Like it's just that doesn't. And so there's a part of your psyche or a part of yourself, the ego, that rejected that, suppressed, denied, and disowned. So you kind of also attract that. I'm not sure if you still do, but there are times probably where that happens, unless you've healed that part of yourself. Right? There's always aspects of our subconscious that has to come out, our inner child. This is tied to the inner child because this is after you're born. These are your early years, your formative years. This is the first house. So, yeah, that's a bit. What else? Okay, so let's go back to this chart right here. So this Claudia. So I was saying that it's like you're also being called to. Your soul wants to go towards being able to learn from, transform through, and transmute these feelings of like any form of infatuation, any sort of unrealistic love that you've gotten into, that you might get into, or people come into your lives, or whoever it is, like wounding from love, right? Where it becomes kind of extreme. If we look at your moon, I don't see it. Let's see where it is. Your moon is trine Chiron, so naturally you have this wounding that comes from kind of like being able to communicate and express your emotions, not necessarily through words, but it can be because your moon is it's sextile to your Mercury. It's actually sextile your Sun, Mercury, all this, the ones that I mentioned earlier, your Sun, Mercury, Venus, Uranus, it's sextile to that. What that means is that when you put effort into being able to express yourself in a very different, like you're yourself, which is like, because for you, this part of your personality is all about being not only different, but it's also like intense and kind of like I wouldn't say like you have like a strong belief about things. I would also probably add in there philosophical. Also athletic. I don't want to take that away. You have athleticism towards you. You probably identify with like foreign things or languages. That's Sagittarius. Or big business, making money. That's part of that as well. So having your own sort of belief system that's tied to that. Tied in with Uranus, you like it to be also different. You like it to be like, oh, I don't like the standard stuff. I don't like that. I like it to always be different. I like it to be weird and unusual. And that's part of your third house. Your moon in your third house signifies that you have that sort of Gemini feel. You like to communicate your emotions. One way or another, you're going to communicate it. Maybe not necessarily verbally, but I would say kind of at times it is verbal. Or maybe for the most part it is verbal. I didn't actually include the other parts here. So going back to the Sun here, your Sun is 28 degrees Scorpio. So that means you also have a very friendly, like you like sort of balance in relationships. The Sun in Scorpio in 28 degrees. Also, we have what you call Dwads. It's not necessarily Scorpio. It's in the last few degrees of Scorpio. That means it has a very Libra feel to it. So you always like equality. You like balance, you like equality, sort of like an airy water feel to it as well. But because your Sun was in Scorpio, we look into Mars and we look into Pluto as well. Your Pluto, I believe, was up here, right? So it has a lot to do with equality. You believe in equality, freedom for all. You believe in I would say probably like you like the underdog as well. I'm not really sure. Because of your moon, you probably like that. But because also it's close to Sagittarius. No, but that's Scorpio. Anyways, there's a possibility. But it's definitely like balance. You like harmony, you like peace. You don't really like that whole being not necessarily confrontational, but if you need to be, it just comes out, right? And there's no harm, no fuss, kind of thing, and that's it. And it's kind of done and over with. You don't necessarily dwell on it. Although you have thoughts that still stick through, like it's still there, especially when it comes to like tied to relationships. Because your Pluto is in Libra, you have that Libra feel to your Sun. And that explains also the Libra Dwad of your Sun, but also your Mercury. Now with your Venus and your Uranus in 3 or 4 degrees, I don't know if you can see it right here. It's in Sagittarius. So it has that, what's it, 3 degrees, sorry, my bad. So it has her Capricorn feel to it. So you tend to also have like very grounded approach. In a way, sometimes can be dogmatic when you express yourself, or especially when you relate with other people. Not necessarily express yourself. When you relate with people, things that you value a lot of times are tied to that sort of belief. You have a strong belief and faith in yourself and what you want, and you want it to be different. So that Capricorn feel affects your Venus, Uranus placements there as well. Now, because it's in, again, let's go back to the Sun, Mercury. Sun, Mercury here is in, okay, so Sun, Mercury placement here is in Scorpio, right? So we look at Pluto, and that kind of gives it an airy feel. So you like a sort of like a, you like it to be sort of like stable. You have a perfectionist sort of aspect to you as well, and you kind of might control things as well a little bit, but you're very like also flowing and you're accepting of people because you want that harmony as well. It's very strong, but Scorpio is a water sign, so that means it kind of has that stubborn sign. It's a fixed water sign, so as long as it's like there's no unnecessary trauma. Like we all go through trauma. So part of you might also resonate with risk taking. That's a big one. Risk taking, taking risks, taboo things as well. I wouldn't be surprised about that. So a lot of it's shadow stuff, taboo, dark things. You're open to that one. You're okay with it, and you kind of openly. I would say you kind of openly are open to it, although it affects your reputation. Your sun, Mercury, Venus, Uranus placement are all square your midheaven. So that means it affects your reputation, your ego, jobs that you've had in the past, right? People might see you as this person who's very knowledgeable, very practical, very, good at helping people. You serve others, and that's how people see you. They see you as like this Virgo. But what you want to portray is not that. You want to portray just sort of like, you don't reveal anything, actually. That's what they think you do. But what you try to present to the world is that Scorpio energy, right? Which in turn again goes back to the shadow of the opposite side of Taurus, because you grew up in a family where just like very practical kind of thing. In fact, part of your beliefs, your core beliefs, is wanting to kind of escape through that, but it's in Pisces, so it affects we're talking about your actual family, how that affects your beliefs, like your mom and dad or whoever your parents are. It has that Pisces feel to it. It's very aloof, distant, very spiritual, probably religious, probably dogmatic, or probably just not caring. That's where that sort of lack of emotion comes in. Maybe part of your emotions that you felt was like, maybe it wasn't validated, it wasn't accepted, it wasn't heard. So you come off as just like you have to sacrifice that, and instead you want to just be like this sort of quiet person. You want to be this shy person. People see you as a shy person, right? But actually what you want to show is you want to show the intensity, right? In Scorpio, you want to be like this highly connective person, really emotional, very supportive, very loyal, very like to the death sort of thing, right? But you have a very sort of softened feel about it because you have your Pluto in Libra, and it's in the last degrees of Libra, so that means it's very strong influence on your Sun, also your Jupiter, and also your Mercury. So how you express yourself, your self-expression, your identity comes through that in that way. Some people might think you're even Libra, but not really. So what else? So what else do we have here? Okay, so where was I going? I'm kind of going back and forth here because they're all connected. That's how we read the charts. You also have Feronia here. Feronia. Did I finish Clytia here? Because it's in Clytia, you have that. You might have to deal with some sort of, it could be your own thing, maybe, maybe you're, I don't know if you were, let's see here. Maybe you're probably accused of it by like people, like children, maybe not necessarily children, but maybe lovers, and you just wanted to, part of you, what do you call this? Areas in your life where you meet people and you just kind of want to enjoy it. Or workplaces or your career or people in the public who feel like they don't understand you. There's a lot of jealousy involved there. I'm going to go into Medusa later, but the whole Clytia thing is, I think that's important because it's closer to your North Node than Feronia. So there could also be issues about neuroticism, psychoticism, schizophrenia, paranoia, stalkers, erotomania, like really like head over heels, religious piety as well. So be careful of those things. Or rather, you question that. There's a part of the question again because it's in retrograde, right? We have retrograde placement here, right? So those are kind of the things there. I forgot that Clytia is related to depression, limerence, obsessive love disorder. Limerence is something to do with like what is this? forgot what that is. It's limerence. I'll look it up later. OCD is probably part of that. So obsessive love disorder, so OLDs. CWS or CODs, neuroticism, psychoticism, against schizophrenia. Attachment disorders, bipolar disorder, major depression, delusional disorders, and monomania. Cognitive behavioral therapies is included here. Exposure and response prevention. Lateral septums, ventral that's part of just the brain here. The enlarged dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is part of the brain that if it shuts down, like maybe in a coma or something like that, I'm not really sure. But I don't think it's coma stuff. But because it is the 8th house, it has to do with health. That's why I'm mentioning the medical stuff. So let's go into Feronia here. So again, it's tied to the family stuff. Any sort of like maybe family issues, any sort of family stuff you've learned carries on over to relationships that you have with, like if you wanted to build a family yourself, especially with your sun in Scorpio. You might want that. But then your moon is in Aquarius, so you're okay with kind of like being single. I'm not saying you're gonna be single, I'm just saying it's still your choice, right? So Feronia is about being like, it's transformative autonomy. It's the part of us just wants to understand nature as its free self, like, you know, where you feel empowered, regenerated, and wild, and free from autonomy, right? Or the opposite, where you feel kind of trapped. Maybe you feel like you have to protect things, or you feel protected, you need to be protective. Again, so transformations. So a lot of it is transformation into the 8th house in terms of family, in terms of anything related to family, DNA, ancestry, blood-related stuff, your basic needs, food, security. So again, it's tied to Verona is about dangers as well. So you might you probably are being called to, because it's in Cancer, it's almost like you're learning to find your own sort of system. Not necessarily family. When I say family, I also mean like your kind of like your own circle of things. And you're kind of figuring out, like, instead of, because in the past maybe you were serving the public too much, that you forgot your own sense of like security, and it kind of just went, it went. I guess it's something to do with like the general family public kind of thing versus your own. I don't know if that makes sense. Okay. Because it's in the 8th house, again, we look into, let's see here. Fertility, reproduction, infertility, sterility, sexual intercourse and conception, like contraceptives, ovulation, uterine lining or period, fertile windows, fecundity and subfecundity. So stuff like venereal disease, gonorrhea, syphilis, chlamydia, nutrition is part of that as well. I'm just, again, remember, astrology is a language of probability, so there could be that any of these things apply to you, or at least one of the things you're learning from. So a lot of it is definitely like, because this is the 8th house, this is a lot to do with inherited, the general gist of it is inherited diseases, inherited healing. It could be diseases or diseases or psychological trauma, feeling like you're not safe, feeling you're not secure, right? Because you had to probably like be of like this sort of like focus more on your career. This is Capricorn. In your past, you're used to that, right? So sometimes you go back into this, and this becomes like your ground zero. This becomes like your, instead of the North Star, you go into your South Star. That's not really a word, right? But so there's a lot of things that have happened in the past, in your past lives. It could be in the past as well. So Lamea is a big one. Lamea is grief. Let me double check here. Lamea is extreme dissatisfaction. Could be narcissism. It could be that you're surrounded by that. Because it's in the 2nd house, some things that are loss of like possession, like also like self-worth. Deep-seated jealousy is part of that as well. mm, your extreme compensation for lack, a hunger for this sort of, I guess, possession or self-worth, and money as freedom. um, so it's just sort of like this feeling of like a succubus feeling, like either you were surrounded by family that was, or people that kind of just like relied a lot on you. So let's take a look. We have Lamia in 0 degrees. It's square Penelope. So Penelope is absolute loyalty. So because of the loyalty you have, it's probably people that you come across that are very kind of like sucking you dry, right? Mother-child bonding is part of that as well. Like, I don't know if it's related to your mother, but it is true relationships. Penelope is in 1 degrees. Medusa is part of that as well. 29 degrees is conjunct that. Medusa is a lot about jealousy. When I say jealousy, I mean like distrust. It's distrust, resentment, and power. Right? If you know the mythology of Medusa, she was a snake-headed. She was actually a gorgon. She was one of the. She's kind of like a titan, basically. So a lot of accusations, possibly, of probably being. It could be that. Hold on. Maybe there's vulnerability in the workplace or your career, or you were accused of your beauty. You're accused of probably like also being apathetic. You're accused probably of maybe a part of you was like kind of like you wanted to be powerful, you wanted to have that, you wanted to regain your power, you wanted to own it, but it probably or in times, especially when you were younger, or maybe when you were unconscious, or you know what I'm saying, it's that you were probably accused of that as being like this sort of like, who do you think you are, you know, you, so a lot of a misunderstanding, misjudgment, maybe accused of something that you didn't do. Shame is part of that as well. So there was a lot of defensiveness there. So gaslighting is part of this as well. Scapegoating could be that you were scapegoated. Ostracized, so ostracism, oppression. And this, I'm going to put this in here, okay? It's a big one. Sorry to say this, but kind of like, I'm not sure if this is part of it. A form of like rape. I'm not sure if it is, but because we have Libra there, maybe it was kind of close to that kind of abuse, where it feels like they're sucking the power out of you, right? It could be misogyny as well. Let's see here. So a lot of it is also like blind faith, right? When before Medusa became Medusa, like your typical Medusa, she was very loyal to Athena, but she was cursed by Athena because she apparently was accused of sleeping with Jupiter, or what's the other name of Jupiter? Zeus, or is it Neptune? I forgot. One of the other gods. So it feels like in that regard, people in the workplace or your careers or in general the public feels like maybe they suck the energy out of you. Maybe they felt like you were like this sort of like doormat. So a lot of it's a lot to do with fidelity or infidelity as well. So they question your own goodwill, right? Maybe they thought you were good enough. Maybe you were just like sort of this, again, like this doormat thing. You know? So she won't do anything. But the moment you come out, it's almost like you're seen as like aggressive, right? And so there's a lot of like probably also competition in the workplace, misidentification. You have to prove your worth. You have to be like man up, right? Things that are inconceivable, surprises, unknown things that are like false or lies, duplicity also is part of that as well. Cheating, dishonesty, and maybe with the public that you've experienced. And it's probably why you're in this right now. Probably you experienced a lot of that trauma. So a lot of fraudulence probably in the workplace, and you probably had to question that and just like ugh. And it could be a sort of a past life thing as well. It doesn't necessarily have to happen now, or it could have been an earlier life. With Lamea there again, it's just like that whole like succubus sort of effect, right? With Ate, there's a lot of chaos with money, a lot of like it's almost like you cannot what do you call this? You can't necessarily be. There's no stability, even though it's in Capricorn. Systems that would feel unstable, system that's full of chaos for the sake of just chaos because maybe people were just jealous of you. Maybe you had this ability that others didn't, right? Because you're very straight. You can be quite straightforward, especially how you relate with people. Just 1 second. Okay, so yeah, so probably insecurities in past lives. Maybe people, yeah, you were surrounded by insecure people who just wanted to use you, kind of thing. Maybe banishment was also included in that. PTSD is probably part of that. Ostracism. It's all kind of coming together, right? A lot of treachery, a lot of curses, a lot of projections, denial, deceit, deception, victimization, unhealed or nurtured home like trauma. Mischief as well is probably included in that one. So people also were hungry for power. Tit for tat. So a lot of people kind of who believed in like just, I don't know, probably it feels like it's more like a past life thing. I don't think it's your thing. And Eros is basically physical love. It's so there's a lot of stuff from your past. Okay, erotic love, right? So a lot of it is also unconscious love. Possibly back then, maybe then, going back to the connection between Lamea and Ate and connecting that with Eros and also Hathor, it feels like in a past life you were surrounded by those kind of relationships. Maybe they kind of thought that you were worthy of being a friend or worthy of being a lover. The second house isn't about love, it's about money and self-worth. So in this case, like kind of like maybe you had to prove your self-worth in the past. And so there was like maybe included with that is like your sexual impulses. Maybe not yours, maybe also other people. And so maybe that's why there's a part of you that kind of rejects that in this life. Maybe there's, you want it to be more like, I want it to be more, say, well, I didn't want to be sexual. There could have been a lot of things that, because I'm seeing a lot of like sexual stuff here, I'm not sure where that lies. I don't know where, I don't want to accuse you or anything like that. It's not about that. But there could have been, right? Let's see what else we have about Hathor here. There's a lot. So let's take a look at Hathor. I feel like there's something about Hathor here. Maybe you could have been like a therapist, like some sort of like a sex therapist. I don't know if it has anything to do with sex therapy or let me see here. Oh yeah, sex therapist. Yeah, a marriage counselor or a life coach. Although it also shows here that because of Hathor, you could also have been like a shamaness or a priestess. If that's tied into the gifts that you have right now, I would say it is. Let's go back to Lamea. If you like, Lamea is like, even though she's like this succubus sort of energy, she has a lot to teach in terms of like, you know, not just satisfaction but contentment, right? Maybe you were also let's see here, like a trauma, victim trauma, like a therapist. Yeah, trauma therapist. I was right. Yeah. So fertility doctors, well, okay, gastroenterologist or digestive diseases specialist, because it's in Capricorn, it's a lot to do with the knees and the skin and the bones. So it's not really pertaining to health, but that could still be linked to that. Something to do with stability, a sort of sense of like a secure foundation. Right? We also have Ubasti here. Ubasti is actually Bastet in Egyptian mythology. So things that are welcome or unwelcome, right? Ubasi represents this sort of like, are we one with nature or are we not one with nature, right? So here you probably had a lot of that whole whether maybe you were in a sort of like a sort of position in the past where you had to choose between being part of a social structure or company or group or something like a sort of like vocation that you had that had to force you to be unnatural. Could be also sexually, could also be relationship wise, it could also just have been related to career. I don't know what it was, but some things that are very unnatural, right? Or the opposite, where it was just like you were completely in tune with Earth, you were completely in tune with Mother Nature, everything was right, and you just resisted everything that was like opposite of that, anything that contradicted all that. You also have Odin in your past life here, Pele and Odin. Pele is about like rage and unexpressed anger. Pele is like the Hawaiian goddess of fire, so she rules volcanoes. So a lot of it is like passion. So you probably had a lot of passion there in the past. Self-mastery as well, because it's a lot to do with passion and anger and wrath, like a volcano, right? There's probably like, you had to kind of like find a way to stand your ground and know which one was something that you could tolerate or accept. Possibly also vindictiveness is part of that as well. I'm not sure if arsony is part of this one, but I don't see it with Capricorn. But there could have been like inflammation, possibly also involved in that in the past. I'm not sure, it's not tied to this one, it's the second house. But possibly, maybe you're kind of some sort of dancer. Pele also rules hula dancing. So I don't know if it's related to the Hathor thing with the love thing. I don't know. Okay, I'm not saying you're a prostitute. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying we don't know, right? But Odin is also here. So Odin represents the part of us that really wants to seek knowledge and learn from wisdom, and sometimes to the point where we make sacrifices towards knowledge. So let's see here. What is Odin? I have this like over 450 page cheat sheet. Literally, I'm looking at it right now, and it's so big, and I continuously grow it. It's like, this is one of my things I do. It's like huge. So yeah, transformation, transmutation, wisdom, right? Kind of like having that high energy that's tied to Pele, so frenzy. Maybe so you're kind of in a frenzy, or you were frantic, or you're kind of like, maybe you're agitated before, or the opposite, because in Capricorn you knew how to calm yourself. You're quite controlled with your emotions. You're very also disciplined with your sexuality and how you relate with people. It's all Capricorn, right? Even though the other things I mentioned before was part of that, and that led to your abundance. Maybe because you had this patience, right? You have this patience to stick through to things, like literally to the end. If you look at the history of Saturn, which rules Capricorn, Saturn is at the end, used to be at the end of the galaxy, or this solar system. That's what people believe. He was representative of death. That's at the end. Anything beyond that was fear. So that kind of ties in why it's like, you have this sort of, you have not only tenacity, but also diligence, right? So that kind of carries on over to your North Node. So, all right. So I had to pause there for a second. But anyway, so going back to this part here. So you have the North Node. Yeah, Square, your Metis, Loki, Pholus, and Destiny. So Destiny is kind of like Destiny, but when I saw Destiny, I was looking it up online. Destiny represents not just Destiny itself. That's kind of the kind of stuff that we're attracted to, that we're drawn to. Like it's almost like something automatic. So not necessarily like Destiny, but kind of. It's tied to your fifth house, so that means that it's in retrograde though. It's almost like there you question, maybe you kind of doubt where your purpose is, specifically like when it comes to things that you enjoy, to the fifth house, anything recreational, children, right? Or rather your freedom from children, freedom having children, the freedom of, or the opposite of that, sovereignty. It's in Aries. So, but also Pholus here in retrogrades. Pholus is about kind of like unforeseen consequences, things that are kind of like when we make a choice, it's kind of just like, oh, it's a mistake. That's like, oh, it's it's I don't know if I did that right. I don't know if it's it's kind of like how do I say this? Pholus is like when we make mistakes and because we're not really conscious, it's kind of like an unconscious thing. I'm not seeing. Okay, here we go. So it's unforeseen consequences, kind of like trauma from the unknown or realization of choices. It could be karmic. It could be sort of. It could be. What's that word? It's not lethal, but basically it could be something that's detrimental or life-threatening. With the whole fifth house thing, it's nothing to do with that. It's just, I'm not just letting you know. But basically, it's also about opportunities and onwardness. Like, so if you make a mistake, you keep moving on, right? Small mistakes with big outcomes. That's kind of those things. There's something else about this one, but basically, it's about learning from maybe making mistakes that kind of hurt you. It could also lead to accidents, any sort of like, if you're accident prone, or say if you get into an accident, it's like, oh, that mistake, that's part of that too. Like wounding from accident, like literally physical. But in this case, yeah, it could be tied to physical because it's in the fifth house is tied to recreational activities. Like it could also mean it's also sports. This sense of like mortality, your sense of passing it on. You don't know, maybe it's like, how should I continue this lineage that I have? That's part of this one. Or rather freedom from that, maybe, because it's like you're doubting, it's like, am I going to be stuck with what I have? I did, because we talked about earlier, I said their inheritance, right? So there's a party that kind of questions that. And that is part of the challenges you experience with like the path of your head. That's just why all these other things that are pulling at your North Star, it's kind of like making you think about your beauty, your security, your safety, your love, your trauma, decisions you have to make, inheritance, DNA, your family history, ancestral things that are ancestral stuff, things that are passed on to you. Specifically, like with Loki and Métis here. Loki is he's a very complicated character, as you probably saw from the Marvel movies, but it's kind of tied in actually. If you look at the mythology, he's like that. He's kind of like he's like traps. He represents a lot of traps. He's kind of like he's very. If you look at the character in the movies of Marvel, like he's actually just pretty much like that. He creates problems for himself by being so like he has a kind of like what what's that? I don't know if it's sort of if it's a phrase we have in English. It's like he has like a viper's tongue, like he's like, whoosh, right? So I'm not saying that you have that. I'm just saying that I think part of it is the experience you had in your family, like whether there was truth or lies in there, like in your experiences where there's a lot of projection, a lot of judging, probably seem kind of like chaotic or off guard or kind of like things are running amok. There's a lot of, or it feels like there's a curse. Um, there's also a lot of blabbering, but there's also a lot of ferocity behind it, right? It's almost Loki's trying to prove something, right? He's like kind of that person, part of our psyche, right? Each planetary body in astrology tends to represent an aspect of our psyche. So, he's also about infatuation, rage, fierceness, seduction, hospitality or the opposite, escapism, thwarting, things that are hidden, kind of like traipsing after people, or basically a lot of insecurities that you're trying to prove yourself. So you kind of either follow the crowd or you kind of don't follow the crowd. And it's kind of confusing. There's a lot of chaos with this Loki's energy here. So he tends to be kind of, let me put it in, let me summarize this one. So I have a lot of notes. So he's proved himself through will and argument. Poisoning. There's a chance of kind of feeling like you're poisoned and you can't breathe. Because you're trying to be correct or you're trying to prove something, right? It's when we start to get tested or test ourselves or test our boundaries in terms of what's true and what's not. It's very it's definitely egoic for sure. So that's the energy of Loki. In the fourth house, because it's tied to the fifth house too, it is tied to, let's see here. Yeah, so having boundaries, limitations, limits. Feeling trapped, of course, right? There's a feeling of trapped or feeling like it's kind of like funny, but it's like it's weird at the same time. It's also tied to lineage as well. There's also maybe misogyny might be part of this one. Toxic environments. I'm not sure if necessarily toxic, but kind of like unconscious environments. Like maybe alcoholism was part of that, or inhibition or disinhibitions. Maybe lack of hospitality or hospitality, like you feel like you belonged where you didn't belong. It probably felt like home environment was kind of inhospitable. And there's a bit of ambushing included there where you get kind of like caught off guard, like I said, off guard. A lot of distractions, delays. Maybe gossips and rumors are part of that as well. Secrets. Let's see here. So there's a lot of that sort of wormy sort of. If you look at like the thing, I don't know if we use this a lot. I think we do. The symbolism of the worm. It's like it latches onto things, very dependent. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if that's the right analogy. Loki, I'm still trying to understand Loki. Loki is quite new as an asteroid for me, but he's very confusing. He's very like, he is a trickster god, so a lot of it is a trick and illusions and what's lies and truth, right? That makes sense. He's kind of like Neptune. If you know a little bit about Neptune. So he's very chaotic, destructive, creates a lot of enemies. So there's a lot of erratic, unpredictable, capricious behavior. There's also cowardice there. So when it comes to that, there might have been a kind of environment that you were in your family. But tying this to Metis is she was internal mental and physiological intelligence. Right? She was she understood. She was like the counsel to Zeus, I believe. So she knows about planning ahead. So in this case, there's about a lot of, I would say there's a lot of cunning that came like in your experience in the home environment. With it in Aries, it's almost like there's a lot of wisdom that kind of maybe was not spoken, that was kind of just like, or at least it kind of felt weird, like your sense of freedom in your family, or at least how you related with your family, or relationship that kind of felt like a family might not have been family. There's like secrets, and there's kind of just like ugh. So very confusing, not very straightforward, unlike typical Aries energy. So there's probably like a lot of strategies that you had to go through, a lot of like planning ahead, just like thinking 10 steps ahead, 10 years ahead. You have your moon in your Aquarius, so that makes sense. You see things, you have this sense of like, what's ahead, what needs to be done. So a lot of strategies involved in the environment, your family environment. Maybe there's a part of you that you also couldn't be at home, not only with family, but those who you deem family as like maybe like a lover, or you got close to. It could be a friend as well, someone like a playmate, someone who's like a workout buddy or whatever it is. But your friendship, it's tied to fourth and fifth house, so that's what I'm getting. So that's the general gist of it. I could go into so much detail. Yeah, so there's a lot of mind processing and strategy and tactic, and had to kind of maybe, in a way, you maybe had to sometimes, maybe not to be negative, but like weasel your way in or out of the chaos in the family, because there was like, so because maybe you couldn't force your way into that, and you had to also make like these weird, like, oh, you had a hard time making certain decisions, possibly, or you did, you just kind of did it for yourself because it's internalized. um Decisions that kind of seems very brash and kind of less like unplanned. It's just like spur of the moment, and you know as part of your destiny, you're kind of drawn to making maybe last minute decisions, or things that are kind of like out of the blue. You're living in the moment, especially, so that way it's kind of like, and it's part of the strategy process, and you have this wisdom from that. It's almost like you can counsel yourself. um that's just what I'm saying right now. It is opposite of the placement again with Medusa and Penelope, like I told you about earlier. It ties into your career. It's in the 10th house right here, so it's opposite of the 10th house. Well, at least, sorry, Loki Metis. Um, Again, so kind of like, in order to get by with careers, because maybe people were jealous of you, they cursed you, and they questioned your loyalty. So you kind of had to find a balance between like, how do I strategize this thing with my career? Where do I go? So there's a sort of like the secret things that you had to keep, things that you just don't reveal to others, and that in turn actually affects your journey forward, because there's a lot of question about security. It all comes back down to security, or family, because family can be security. Family is inheritance. Family is lineage. Family is future. So yeah, so you had to kind of sometimes just like keep it on the download, or hush hush, and create boundaries where you need to create boundaries, and then let go where you need to let go. Very similar to mine, actually. So yeah, that's the gist of that one. Okay, so what tends to happen though is that you naturally have jobs that kind of, in a way, you work through jobs that are kind of through. When I say jobs, isn't like not just necessarily jobs. See this placement right here, these blue lines that you see, those are like trines and sextiles. Those are natural aspects, and very easy, comfortable aspects in astrology. And so what that means is, with jobs, there's jobs, Cernunnos, Terpsichore, Fama, and Sekhmet. So Cernunnos is their ability to connect with nature. It's that feeling of like, are we empty or are we full? Right? Because there's a lot of abundance, but sometimes maybe there's like spending. But in this case, it's tied to the 11th and 12th house. So maybe you develop your sense of abundance, and jobs that you find through when you trust your inner nature, when you trust your ability to adapt and be one with nature and kind of figure out from there, like how to be basically everywhere, so to speak, like be connected. This leads to kind of like this sense of abundance, sense of what do you call this? Maybe tenacity as well. Tenacity is part of this one. Your sense of strength and your what do you call this? Either your smallness or your pettiness or your you're connected. You feel that connected, that abundance, like I said, with particularly pertaining to communities or the groups that you're in or the money you make. That's where your jobs are as well. This is also where you kind of start new things as well. It's almost like you kind of get into this flow of community, and it's natural for you, kind of like, because sometimes you have to change because it's like, no, this is insecure, right? On the other side here, you tap into, let's see here, you have Dejanira. Things that kind of became toxic, things that were, you kind of know how to work with, people who manipulated you or people that where you felt manipulated. You felt like maybe you had to be rescued and you had to play this sort of like soft, demure person, and kind of just like passive. And then, but you remember a lot of that. You have Nemesine here, Dejanira, but you also have Amalthea, which is like abundance. Abundance here comes from that inner trust that you have in the divine, and really true abundance, right? This is where you might be seen as demure, but really it's more about like you understand kindness and you work through your sense of this is part of your core beliefs, that you do want to portray this to the world. Or rather, not necessarily portray, this is kind of like part of what makes you go, that there's always some sort of hope. You're very trusting, you're very flexible, you're adaptive, but sometimes you have to run away. This is a Pisces energy. Sometimes you don't make your decisions right away, and you kind of just like, right, because you come from that family where maybe they made like brash decisions, like what, right? So, or maybe it's the opposite, right? And so that kind of it helps you move in the direction that you want to. We have Terpsichore here as well in this grand trine. So when you have to, what is this one? Something to do with music. Is it music and dancing? Let me check here. Oh, okay, cool. You have Terpsichore in your 12th house, so it's kind of feels more like a dream. It's part of like what you dream about. You know how to dance in your dreams, so to speak. Like you know how to work with the subconscious. It's I think it's where your creativity lies. It's where you know how, like I said, dancing. It's where you find inspiration. It's where you actually find pleasure. It's rewarding, it's invigorating, it's creative, it's mesmerizing. There's a lot of expression that happens through your dreams. Let's see if it's retrograde. No, it's not retrograde. And maybe there's a part of the dreams about being famous. Not necessarily like you want to be famous, but it's like, it's where you feel like you're more at home. And in fact, because it is a subconscious, this is 12th house, this could also be tied to like other lives that you're drawn to. So probably in a different life, you were famous. You're a famous dancer. Maybe someone who's connected more to nature. And it became part of like this constant job you had it was new all the time. Aurora represents new things. But the whole thing about this grand trine here, actually before we go into the grand trine, let's look at, I forgot Sekhmet. Sekhmet was the goddess, okay. Either it's soft or hard, hot or cold. You remember that song by Katy Perry? You're hot and you're cold, you're less and you're no, you're in and you're out, you're up and you're down. Right, so that's kind of like Sekhmet. It's not about being indecisive. It's kind of just like, it's kind of like bipolarism. And I'm not judging bipolarism because I think it's interesting. So, which actually kind of ties in with what we talked about earlier. I think in one of the asteroids, I believe it was, what was it? Clitia, right? So extreme emotions, right? So, and that's okay. You probably have those in your dreams, or again in a different life, because when you do go into dreams, it could be something subconscious, but it could also be another life. So, one second here. Okay, so let's see. So that's the gist of that one. In terms of things that come naturally to you that you kind of still have to work with, is working with sometimes maybe you doubt your inner ability to connect with your true abundant nature. And it becomes sort of like, maybe there's a part of you that doubts, like specifically when it comes to your health, there's a part of you that doubts that ability to set yourself free, health-wise, literally like health-wise, like physical health. Because you have chaos here, conjunct Pandora. It's in retrograde. There's also Lilith. So your shadow work stuff, whether maybe there's a part of you that kind of questions like, am I, like maybe either you've had to so-called demonize certain health practices, or it was also done to you, because it's shadow, but compared with chaos. Chaos is a dwarf planet way out there. Chaos is like the dark primordial energy, the mother energy. How do I explain chaos? It's the origins. It represents the origins of life. So that in us, that sort of primordial energy that's in us, that's connected to, source energy. And with Pandora, as you probably already know from mythology, Pandora is, yes, that's Pandora's box, or the can of worms. But Pandora also represents hope, right? But she also represents innocence and loss thereof. So in this case, you probably feel like you don't want to. Maybe there's a part of you that doubts your ability to trust. You're really like your divine feminine, your darkness as well. Especially because it's in Taurus. It's almost like this sort of like closed in, and like maybe the darkness that comes from this anything to do with beauty, anything to do with art, anything to do with leisure. There's a darkness in us, in all of us, that sometimes we reject, right? And that's because maybe in terms of like the money you earn, this is probably why it changes. Maybe it has changed quite a lot, or it probably does still. But you're very committed to it anyways. You're very loyal to your communities that you're in, your groups that you're in, collectives that you're in. It's part of the job thing that you have. So not necessarily job, but like money that you earn as well, because it is tied to the 11th house. That's money you earn from your employer. But that's opposed to this Chaos Pandora Lilith placement, right? So, so there's a fear behind that and exploding and be like, you know what, I don't want this job. Or maybe you have had to do that, where just like there's a reason why you had to renew certain jobs, or you had to go to another job, and maybe there's a part of you that also kind of holds on to a job because you're afraid of the new, or the opposite, or vice versa. Especially when there's no harmony in it, there's no feeling of like, so there's a part of you that kind of like rejects that sort of like, maybe you need to find a balance between the chaos and order. That's what I'm trying to say here. At the same time, so there's this wonderful thing that's got happening here. Do you see that? There's that shape right here. I'm gonna show it to you. Right here. You probably see it already. Due to this hexagon happening. So this hexagon happening, that's so beautiful. Actually, I love it. It's kind of like, let's go into Alecto. Alecto is one of the fates, I believe. No, one of the Furies. So sometimes you have to work at your anger, especially when it comes to like your personal belief system, regarding your career path, your ego, your reputation in the world, like where you feel like you belong or not belong, and at the same time how that affects the jobs that you're in. Why do I have to start over? Maybe I don't want to start over because it's like it's not stable. And at the same time, it's like the gifts that I have, what can I do to so there's a lot of things that you work through, but you kind of work through it naturally. There's this sort of thing going on, this roundabout thing happening. So you notice that there's a Star of David happening here. So it's all kind of connecting together, and so this is sort of like symbiosis. And there's this sort of flow. But it gets interrupted because these are comfortable placements or comfortable aspects. The lines are aspects. They tend to be so comfortable that if there's something new that comes along, it's like, what? Like, especially an external force, an external person, external experience, something that's outside of your control, that's not part of your experience in the path that you're in, your personality, your whole self, everything, then it's like it gets shaken up and you're just like, okay, so then you have to go back into it. So kind of, I guess I think you already know what to do in terms of like what to do. So I'm not going to tell you what to do. There is sometimes that you do make adjustments for. You have like these adjustments periods in terms of like your relationships with people or your relationship with yourself. You have your Venus, Uranus right here and your moon right here. There's this quincunx right here to your north node. So it feels like you because you're in it for the long haul, you know what it means to have a family. Maybe not necessarily literally family, but your sense of community or family, whatever you define as family, is a lot to do with sometimes you adapt your desires, which is the moon, your basic needs, and your own desires, like your wants and what makes you happy, what makes you shine, what makes you go, oh, that's nice, I love that. Right, but also what makes you comfortable, makes you feel safe, right? You adapt sometimes to like, okay, maybe there are some things that I just have to let go. What was this one? This one was, I don't remember what this one was. Oh, okay, this is the south node. This is regarding the south node. So sometimes even though you have all these natural gifts when you were like we talked about your south node, all those things about Lamia, all those things, you can rewind back into the video if you want to. You adjust through where you kind of spend your money, specifically with relationships, who you commit to, and you want to make sure it's kind of like, but you doubt that actually. It's retrograde. Your money starts like, maybe there's a part of you like doesn't know how to save money and you don't know how to be natural about it. You kind of don't know how to where you set your boundaries in. I'm not saying that's what it is, but there's a possibility. Maybe you've changed. I mean, you have changed, but maybe you've changed that and you kind of learned how to adapt to that. It is in Mercury, so that means it's a lot to do with how you communicate that, how you process that in terms of like your understanding of it, your learning process of it, especially like when it comes to relationship and connections with people. Usually most of the stuff we do is tied to people. So, and as you also adapt to let's see here, Cronus. So you probably like discover that you have these little gifts that you have, but you don't know how to sometimes, maybe there's a part of you that doubts integrity. There's a sort of like, my skills that I have, am I trusting them, right? And Cleo, I believe, is one of the muses. Cleo is, okay, got it. So you kind of go back into your past a lot, and you kind of go back into like what that was. And that's part of your North Node too. So Cancer is also part of tradition. It's also part of history. A lot of people who are Cancer, they're drawn to history. Gilgamesh is Gilgamesh, but Gilgamesh has a lot to do with, what is he? Inner strengths and weaknesses, right? Sort of feeling powerless, mistakes that you probably made, because it is about your philosophy, and this is the ninth house. A lot to do with maybe law breaking, maybe, I'm not sure. The feeling of powerlessness. I'm not sure if sexual exploitation is here. No, that's not it. Let me see if it's tied to anything else. No, it's not. But yeah, something to do with adventures and maybe vanity and fame and glory and retaliation, resistance, hurting others, probably, or either way, could go either way, right? The patriarchal system and its mistreatment of people, specifically women. Okay. Mistreatment of animals. Maybe loneliness is part of that as well, possibly. Sadness is hardness. Maturity is part of that as well. Rejection, dispelling, recovery, ascendance or descendance, kind of being distanced, heartless, experiencing oppression or suppression, tyranny, forced labor. Yeah, it's a lot to do with the strengths and weaknesses. Misinterpretation is part of that too, because of its philosophy. Maybe surrendering to unconscious or subconscious truth and or powers. Rejuvenation, loss and recovery, abyss, the underworld, mistakes, losses, losing things, attacks, defeats. Boundaries as well, particularly with like when it comes to ninth house stuff, which is usually related to travel, philosophy, religion, belief systems, foreigners as well, big businesses. This is a ninth house, but also maybe kind of like having your own inner enemy, or no, inner not enemy. This is Nessus. Maybe you feel like there's a part of you that has to still deal with abuse, particularly maybe with foreign people, or at least in big businesses, or your philosophy, your higher education. Maybe you experience this in university or college. There could be a lot of things as well. There's lots of things. But I'm kind of just summarizing everything because I don't want to make this too long. I just want to make sure that it's enough that you get it. If you have any questions, I think that's it for now. That's the gist of what I can get right now, because it could go so deep, like so deep. Like we're talking like a whole library of it. And that's the whole process. Like, because I deal with a lot of like these things, like the asteroids, there's a lot of things to go through. So but yeah, we can go more into this stuff if you want to. But I hope that helps. That's it for today. Thank you very much. Oh, my face is too close to the camera. Oh, here we go. There you go. Anyways, I hope that helps. Thank you for watching. And for those who have any questions, let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys later. Bye.